This is a story about two individuals. One is named Rabbi Yehuda Ferris of CHABAD of the East Bay, and the other one is named William John Rogers, who's an attorney apparently out of Petaluma, California. His license number is 15. Let's see, I always get it mixed up. I think it's 219154 or 154219. It seems as if these two individuals are extremely fixated and obsessed with torturing the brother of a man who died of cancer in 2020. When one could speculate as to why Yehuda Ferris and Will Rogers are so obsessed with torturing this guy, one possible theory is that this man kept his brother alive for 6 years, and perhaps Yehuda Ferris and his wife and Will Rogers were depending on the man to die so they could quickly liquidate his assets. And they're mad at the brother for keeping him alive. I mean, that's one theory. It's possible. But these two individuals, Will Rogers and Yehuda Ferris, they've been torturing the man's brother ever since the man died. And I'll tell you how. And it's all documented. Okay, so who died? Man lived in Berkeley for like 45, 50 years, came here in the 70s, moved in with a Filipino woman to 1810 Grant Street in Berkeley off Delaware by Ohlone Park, had two daughters, began to work for Yehuda Ferris, who runs a synagogue called Chabad of the East Bay. He's been in Berkeley for 45 years. He's from Chabad Lubavitch, a Hasidic movement in New York. And it's a pretty well-known group. And so this man works, the man who died of cancer worked for them, for Yehuda Ferris and his wife, for like 30 years, long time. You know, especially in the winter months, he was financially dependent on them because the man was a sweat and blood laborer. He built houses and put in floors and windows and painted, and he wasn't an office worker. He worked with his hands every day, 6 days a week. And he paid the mortgage on this house, and he raised his two daughters who are technically not Jewish. They never converted, and the mother wasn't Jewish. So everything in Judaism goes by the mother or conversion. So he left the house in 2011, broke up with the woman. The kids were already like in college, going to school to be occupational therapists, not drug addicts, but functioning, able to make a living. So what happened? He left the house in 2011, and in 2014, he suddenly came down with terminal liver cancer and given 6 months to live. Well, the daughters were in constant contact with him, even though he had left the house and separated from the mother. But no sooner did he get 6 months to live from terminal liver cancer, then the daughters never showed their faces for the next 6 years, and he never saw them, and he died without seeing them. And that's, we know that because we were there with our brother, but they made it official in testimony, sworn testimony, on August 19th in this case here, RP 221-20163 in Alameda County Probate Court. So the point that I'm trying to make is that Yehuda Ferris and Will Rogers are obsessed with torturing the man's brother. I guess they're not satisfied that he didn't suffer enough anticipatory grief for 6 years, that his brother had 6 months to live every 6 months for 6 years. They couldn't empathize that was enough, so they had to keep torturing him when his brother died. I mean, maybe they're intense sadists. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, but it's just logic would have it based on their actions since his brother died of cancer in 2020. So hold on a second. So what happened was, the first thing they did was, Yehuda Ferris became the trustee of the man's trust. Probably he didn't know who to turn to. He felt like he was dying any second, and he turned to someone that he trusted. So he says, okay, Rabbi Yehuda Ferris, I'm going to make you the trustee of my trust. I'm going to put my half of the house in the trust, and you're going to give, as per my wishes, part of my property to my siblings. And so this guy, William Rogers, who I think was a plant by Yehuda Ferris in retrospect, because my brother never got a lawyer. He took him forever to get a cell phone. He just didn't know. We were shocked when this lawyer appeared out of nowhere. It's probably Ferris's friend from day one. So what happened next was when he passed away, they violated the law as a trustee. They presented to the man's brother and his two sisters this trust that is in this screenshot right here on this video that was written apparently or supposedly on August 26, 2019, 4 months before he died on January 20th, 2020. That's 4 months later. But he was already pretty much dead clinically. He was in a liver coma for like 6 months. So they didn't tell the beneficiaries that there was another trust and that this was an amended trust. Well, the probate code says when there is an amended trust that you're supposed to present to the beneficiaries both the amended trust and the original trust, because there's a law that says they only have 4 months to object. Well, they didn't tell, so that was their first violation of the law. They didn't tell the man's brother or his sisters that the trust that they're presenting was in fact amended. The brother, who was living with his brother 24/7 the last year of his life, he had got back possession from the girlfriend, discovered the original trust in the house. And the original trust in the house reflected the man's true wishes, which was what he told everybody for 6 years. He said, my daughters didn't speak to me for 1 second the whole 6 years before I died, so I'm going to leave them 25% of the house, but I'm not going to leave them my entire half. So that was what was in the original trust that they didn't show us, right? So we were all humiliated, including our brother, that his own flesh and blood daughters didn't have the common decency to pick up the phone and say hello, didn't have the common decency to come around and visit. No, they just tortured him to death with isolation. There's no excuse for that. You're a grown-up adult. You're a medical professional. They're licensed occupational therapists, and they don't even pick up the phone to see their own father? I mean, that is pure sadism, and it kills cancer patients whenever that happens. It's documented. Okay? Every doctor knows this. Every nurse knows this. Every orderly knows this. And they're all, in every hospital, this behavior manifests in about 3% of dying patients. There's always one patient who nobody ever comes around, and those are the people that hospital people hate more than anybody. So just ask anybody that works in a hospital, say, hey, do you know those patients that die alone, and don't you hate their family? Oh, yeah, I do. Oh, God, don't even mention them. They ruin our life. So I never saw it over 6 years, but as a medical person, I've seen it in the way that I just described. So the man who died of cancer wrote in his trust very explicitly that the daughters can only get 25% each of his half, no matter what, and it's an irrevocable trust. So as soon as he died, he had already been living in the house a year. The brother had already been living in the house with them. So when COVID hit, everybody was in lockdown. And then there's probate laws that if you're living with someone and they have possession of a property and you're a beneficiary, well, you have a right to live there, like until things are resolved. Or so I was told by a million attorneys. So when my brother died, I started calling all these attorneys, all these trust litigation attorneys, and everyone says they're the only ones that can handle your case. Nobody else even knows how to fight those kind of cases. So they told me, yeah, you have a right to live there. And they told me my rights and what I could do. But they said they're not interested in the case because it's not enough money. It's only $1 million worth of real estate. And I found $80,000 and $70,000 in cashier's checks in the house. And I gave the checks to Yehuda Ferris and William Rogers. They didn't even thank me. And they never paid us our money. And it's 5 years later. And my sisters are extremely poor, headed to retirement with no Social Security income set because they haven't worked enough, and they don't have any money, any savings, any husbands, any businesses, any property, any stocks. No, they could be living in the street in 1 second at this point. They have absolutely zero financial security. And so our brother wanted to fix that and say, well, if I had to die early, then I'm going to leave something for my sisters, right? It's just logical, isn't it? Anybody would do that, wouldn't you? I would. And so that's what my brother told me every day for 6 years. He says, I'm leaving something for you and your sisters, and especially for the sisters because I know how poor they are, and they're single. They're not married, let alone to breadwinners. And the trust specifically says the daughters could only get 25%. In both the original trust that I found that gives us property and in the second trust that they found. Now, in the second trust, it says we're to get $30,000 each, plus 10% interest a year. Every year we don't get it, and it should become a lien on the property with interest until paid in full. So these two people are so obsessed with torturing the man's brother that first they gave him a trust that was illegal. They didn't include the original trust with the amended trust, so it was illegal because they didn't tell him it was amended. Then he finds 70,000 of his brother's checks in the closet that he almost threw them in the garbage. And so he faithfully gave them to the trustee and Rogers. And 5 years later, him and his sisters got nothing. But let's stay on track here. So why are they so obsessed with hatred of this man? It's a good question. So the first thing they did was they didn't tell him it was an amended trust. The second thing they did was when they went to court, they said, he's freeloading off his brother. He was only living in the house because he's obsessed and he thinks he owns it, and because he was homeless and needed a place to live. They didn't say because he was trying to keep his brother alive, and he has medical certification and experience. Then, as COVID was keeping everybody a shelter in place and people were dying and nobody knew it was going to be the end of the world or not, suddenly in May of 2022, Yehuda Ferris and Will Rogers, who are hell-bent on torturing this guy after his brother died after 6 years. First, they accuse him of freeloading off his brother and embarrassing him in the court filing, saying, well, he wasn't really taking care of his brother for 6 years, and especially that last year in the house 24/7, but he was just homeless and needed a place to live, and he's delusional, and he won't leave because he thinks he owns the place. But they didn't mention that COVID-19 was causing a world lockdown and that everybody was ordered by the government to shelter in place. They didn't mention that. And then suddenly 2.5 years into the pandemic, in May of 2022, both Rogers and Ferris send the man's brother a letter saying, if you don't vacate in 2 months, then you and your sisters aren't going to get anything. So just pack your bags and leave. In fact, Roger's wife wrote an email saying, well, why don't you just pack up and leave? Just pack up and leave. But they didn't offer any money. The guy said, well, you got my money? You got my $30,000 plus 10% interest a year and my sisters also? Nope, we don't. Well, where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to live? But they had planned to kill him by kicking him out in the middle of the COVID pandemic. That's what it was. They sold the property for $80,000 to the daughters, who are the ones who are not allowed to get 50% of the property. It says in the trust, the majority portion of the trust is dependent on a settlement agreement between me and my ex-girlfriend. That settlement agreement's included in the court papers. It says she will give her half of the house to the daughters, and he will give the majority portion. So what do? They spit in the man's face and his sister's face and the man who passed away's face by violating the trust that Rogers wrote and turning over the entire half of the house to the daughters. But it doesn't end there. They did it for $80,000. They said, you give us $80,000, we'll give you $1 million in real estate. And then they didn't have any money for us for our $90,000 plus 10% interest a year. But they could lie through their teeth and go to the court and say, well, Judge, we had the money, but they wouldn't take it, and he started suing us. Nobody started suing anybody. There was a lawsuit filed only after the $1 million worth of real estate was sold for $80,000, and our inheritance was nowhere to be found, because if you sell the property for $80,000, how are you going to put a lien on the property that's already sold? How are you going to get them their $90,000 plus 10% interest a year? So they're obsessed with torturing this man. So then he interviews all these probate attorneys, but nobody wants to take the case. the trust litigation attorneys say, sorry, we don't take cases that small. It's like someone at a fancy restaurant doesn't take homeless people in to get a cup of noodles. They just don't do it, right? They need rich clients. Well, so do trust litigation attorneys and legal aid societies and pro bono programs and legal assistance for seniors. They don't either. They don't have any trust litigation attorneys. I searched 40 hours a week for 5 years and never came up with anything. So the brother just started filing his own lawsuits in pro per with the hope that he would protect statute of limitations and find a lawyer to take over and bring some justice and bring some money to his sisters as per his late brother's wishes. Because after all, they're going to be 65 pretty soon, and they don't have any money. They don't have any property. They don't have any husbands. They're not doctors, professors, or lawyers. They're not even college graduates. No degrees. So, and then COVID shut down the entire world, and you know that for an extremely long time. So what happens? What happens? They try to evict him in the middle of COVID pandemic. He would have died if he had been evicted when they wanted him to. He could have died from exposure to COVID, but he found a great lawyer who the paralegal took him under his wing, and they stalled the whole entire trial for they stalled the whole entire trial for a whole year, but he did eventually have to leave. So now these two people who are obsessed with torturing the cancer patient's brother, here's what they did. First, they gave him a trust that they didn't tell him, they didn't provide the amended trust. Then they turned around and he gave them $70,000 in cashier's checks that his brother took all his money out of the bank and made cashier's checks. He found the checks, and being an honest person that he is, he turned them over to the trustee. But he never gave him any money. He never gave his sisters any money. And then they started bad-mouthing the guy to the judge, saying, well, he didn't take care of his brother. He just was freeloading. And then they didn't ask permission of the judge if they could sell the house. They didn't ask permission of the other beneficiaries, the brother and his two sisters. They just sold the house without asking the court anything because they're outlaws, right? And then they turn around and say, well, if you don't get out in 2 months, then you and your sisters aren't going to get a dime. So that they said either get out and die in the street of COVID, or else you and your sisters won't get any inheritance. And he said, you got my money? They didn't even answer. So then he starts filing lawsuits. They sell the house. A year later, he has to move. He files a counter lawsuit, a quiet title lawsuit, which is separate from probate, but it's the same issue. And then finally, the probate judge says, okay, we're going to trial in August of 2024. Well, the guy doesn't have a lawyer yet, so he can't do it. So no matter what, the judge is hell-bent because she's overworked. She's the only trust judge in Alameda County of 1.6 million people, so she's got a lot of cases. And she can't transfer them to anyone else because she's it. She's the only trust judge in the whole county of Alameda. So she's overwhelmed. So she sees an easy way to get rid of this guy because he's not a lawyer. That's one less case she has to deal with. So then there's a trial date in August. And then the guy realizes, well, I'm going to lose anyway, so I might as well dismiss without prejudice so I can bring back the case another day. So that's what he did. Except for one thing, the trust contest, he didn't have statute of limitations. So he goes to that. But they thought that they were going to go in there and close the whole case in August. And so they got so angry that the guy dismissed without prejudice, means he can bring back the cases another day. So what did they do? They lied to the judge and said he filed 30 lawsuits, put him on the bad list of vexatious litigants. And the judge went along with it. And now the guy is blacklisted not only in the probate court and can't file a lawsuit, but he's not allowed by law to file a lawsuit anywhere in the whole state of California unless he has a lawyer to do it for him. But guess what? No lawyers represent vexatious litigants. It's the unwritten rule of California law and probably the whole United States. If you're on the vexatious litigant list, whether it's legitimate or not, you're never going to find a lawyer. And then you got to ask permission of the local judge, and Alameda County won't let anybody on that list file a lawsuit. So they have effectively blacklisted the guy from ever finding an attorney and ever filing a lawsuit by himself. And he could be on that list forever, even though he's got it on appeal. He doesn't have an appellate attorney. And so they're obsessed with torturing this guy. It wasn't bad enough his brother died. Wasn't bad enough that they kept telling him every 6 months for 6 years. Then they cheated him by not showing him the true trust, that there were 2 trusts, and they only showed him the second one to try to screw him up so he wouldn't file a trust contest within 120 days. And then they go to the judge and say, well, he wasn't really taking care of his brother. He was just a homeless guy, needed a place to live, and he's got mental problems thinking he owns the place. So then they sell the property in blatant violation of the trust to the 2 daughters for $80,000. So there goes the man's lien on the property with interest for him and his sisters. Then they tried to kick him out during the COVID pandemic, and that if they had succeeded, he could have died of COVID because he would have been out in the street. Not a year later, because his lawyer stalled the case, but if it was up to them and he hadn't found a lawyer, he would have been out in the street a year earlier and could well be dead by now. And then that wasn't enough. They continued to torture him by, after he dodged going to court and getting all his cases dismissed, they turned around and lied to the judge, and they said he filed 30 lawsuits in the last few years. And the guy said, no, it's only 7. They just reprinted 7 30 times. And the judge said, I don't care. I'm still making you a vexatious litigant. So now the guy's blacklisted all over the whole state of California. He can't ever file a lawsuit anywhere. And he'll never get a lawyer to help him because no lawyers represent vexatious litigants. They don't. And if that wasn't enough, then they go to court and try to get a restraining order saying, well, we don't want him talking to the newspapers and going on social media because he's making us embarrassed. And then, if that wasn't enough, now they're threatening him that if he doesn't remove all the social media posts, that they're going to get a restraining order and that could lead to jail time, and they're going to file a lawsuit against him. So what is it with Yehuda Ferris and William John Rogers? I think they're fixated on this guy and they can't stop harassing him. But hopefully there'll be justice and they won't succeed.